My family and I lived at the time in Zambia, Africa, and we'd been there for just a few months, and it was to be our anniversary. And we were pretty excited about that. We didn't know, but some of our friends that we had recently made there had planned a surprise evening for my wife and I. And they came and they kidnapped us from their house. And they said, well, watch your kids, don't worry. And they put blindfolds over our faces and they had us get in the van. And they were driving us around campus. I wasn't feeling real good. Have you ever been surprised and you weren't like so excited about it? And so they drove us around, and I got feeling worse and worse as we were driving around. And they drove us around campus. We worked at a place called Riverside Farm Institute, and they have a lifestyle center there up on the hill. It's beautiful on this hill overlooking this lovely African landscape with this river that goes by, hence it's called Riverside. And the lifestyle center is just a gem. The first president of the country, Kenneth Kaunda, regularly goes to this lifestyle center and enjoys being there. So they had a meal for us out on the veranda overlooking the setting sun. It was incredible. I was with the love of my life, but I wasn't feeling real well. So then they had this massage planned. Now my wife knows, but you don't know, I don't really like massages. I had a massage once by a friend. He did it for a living, and he took me into this room, and the lights were low, and the music was playing, and it just felt weird. Anyway, so I'm not a big massage guy. So they took me into this room, and they turned the lights down low, and the music was playing, and they had the lotion, and I love the guy that was massaging my back. I really think a lot of Anthony. But it felt like his hands were the size of wheelbarrows, and he was just crushing me. I wasn't feeling well, and Anthony, I'm just, hey, can we just stop, man? I just don't feel good. And so, yeah, okay, no problem, Chris. And so I got back together, and my wife came out glowing. Oh, she loves massages. So we went home and got in bed, and I just didn't feel well. And the next day, I was like, Faith, I feel just terrible. I just ache. I feel like I have the flu. I don't know what it is. And she said, Chris, maybe you have malaria. And malaria is not a good word. It's not 4 letters, but it's a bad word. And I felt like, okay, maybe, I don't know, you know. Just up the hill at the Lifestyle Center, there is a gravestone. A doctor had come over and his wife to be on a little mission trip, and she contracted malaria. They decided to try to treat it naturally, and it didn't work. And she died. Her grave is right there. Malaria is serious. It's something you don't joke around with. And so I had been cautioned, Chris, if you think you have malaria, go get tested. And if the test turns out positive, you have it. If it turns out negative, you might have it. So the general rule of thumb is if you don't feel well, get tested and then take malaria medicine. So that's what I did. The test came back negative. Oh, I don't have malaria. Good. But I'll take the medication anyway. They had a new medication was out. It was supposed to be a miracle. And so I took this medication, and I just kept feeling just worse and worse. I was weak. I could hardly walk around. And so they said, okay, well, you have to take the stronger medicine. And the stronger medicine has big side effects, suicide, hallucinations. And so I took the stronger medication, Coartem, and sure enough, I started to hallucinate. And I mean, it was just insane. And I got weaker and weaker. And over the weekend, I couldn't get out of bed. I was just finished. And my neighbor, Jones Hachombwe, and my friend Myring Pretorius, they came over, and I just remember them being beside my bed. They knelt down, and they put their hands on me, and they prayed for me. That felt so nice. Have you ever been prayed for like that? It feels nice. They cared about me. But the next day, it was no better. And my wife made the decision, no, he has to go to the hospital. And so they took me into Lusaka, the capital. And there's several hospitals in town. The main hospital, the government hospital, you don't want to really go to. It's not, anyway, people go there to die. I mean, it's really bad. And so there's another hospital. It's called CFP, Clinic for Profit. And they run it for profit. They charge you for it. And so but that's the best place to go. So they took me there, and I remember getting in the wheelchair, and just being weak. Faith had to help me, and I was just shaking, and I sat down in the wheelchair, and they wheeled me in, and they checked me in. Are you going to pay? Yes, we will pay. You'll make sure you pay all of it. Yes, we'll pay all of it. Please help me. So they wheeled me back in this room. My neck was stiff. I could hardly move. I was just rigid. And Faith explained to them all what was happening to me. They took my blood pressure. They laid me on a bed, kind of like this table here, more, with a little cushion. And then they pulled the curtain around me and left me there. And I heard my wife on the other side crying, sobbing, actually. And the doctor told her, "Woman, get a hold of yourself." I don't know if that helped, but I laid there thinking, am I going to die? Have you ever faced that question? Am I going to die here? I'd like to study something with you today in 1 Corinthians. As we open God's Word, let's have prayer. Father in heaven, we are grateful for your Word. It's the one thing that gives us a glimmer of hope in this dark world. As we open your Word today, help us to rightly understand it, we pray in Jesus' name. Amen. So as a church, we're going through 1 Corinthians chapter by chapter, doing an exegetical study of the book. I've been assigned 3 chapters, 1 Corinthians 7, 8, and 9. I will not be able to accomplish the task, so I've shortened the goal to 1 Corinthians 8. We're skipping 7, we're looking at 8, and a little bit of 9, okay? So 1 Corinthians 8 is where we're going to go. 1 Corinthians is not actually the first book of Corinthians. Paul had written another letter to the Corinthians. I can give you that reference if you're interested in that. 1 Corinthians 5, verse 9, Paul refers to the other letter he sent. So 1 Corinthians is really 2 Corinthians. And 2 Corinthians is really 3 Corinthians. And the Corinthians had sent him a letter, and so he's responding to that. You see that in 1 Corinthians 7. He says he's responding to the letter they sent, and they were having issues. The Corinth church was a problem church. And so Paul is dealing with issue after issue after issue in this church, and he starts out 1 Corinthians 8, verse 1. Now as touching things offered to idols, we know that we all have knowledge. So this doesn't make a lot of sense to us because we don't work in that context, but in their day, idols were a big deal. And they would offer sacrifices to these idols. And then afterwards they would kind of share the food. They would eat. Now, eating of the food represented to them participating in honor of that idol. And so this was a big deal in the church, and in Acts 15, the church had dealt with this issue already. They said, don't eat food sacrificed to idols. Well, guess what they were doing in Corinth? They were doing that very thing. They were the edgy church, pushing the boundaries, trying to find ways around what the clear, defined word was. So Paul picks up this issue. It's happening. There's a contention in the church. In 1 Corinthians 8, verse 1, he begins to deal with this. It's a hot issue. You know in churches there's hot issues? There's issues that you just don't want to touch. Well, Paul wasn't afraid. He just touched it. He spoke right to it. Now, as touching things offered to idols, we know that we all have knowledge. So, this may seem a little irrelevant. What do idols and eating that food have to do with me today? But you're going to see that this chapter has extreme bearing in your life. It's actually the gospel lived out. We'll see here shortly. But he says, we know that we all have knowledge. So it seems a little redundant. But he's building a case. The words he's using here are very important. We all have knowledge. Now, please raise your hand if you have no knowledge. We all have knowledge. You can agree with Paul's argument, right? Yes, we all have knowledge. And he said, knowledge puffs up, but love edifies or builds up. He's contrasting two things here. Knowledge separate from love. Knowledge used apart from love is not beneficial. It just puffs up. Now he builds his case from here. Verse 2, and if any man think that he knows anything, he knows nothing as yet he ought to know. Now, how true that is. The more you study something, the more you realize how little you know about it. Ask any physician, how well do you understand the human body? Well, I'm just practicing medicine because I can't understand all the intricacies of the human body. The more you know, the less you realize you actually do know. We can agree with Paul here. He knows nothing as he ought to know. Verse 3, but if any man love God, the same is known of him. What a beautiful thought. If we love God, he knows us. Love is the principal thing. Paul builds his case further in 1 Corinthians 13. Verse 4, as concerning therefore the eating of those things that are offered in sacrifices to idols, we know that an idol is nothing in the world, and that there is none other God but one. Verse 5, for though there be that are called gods, whether in heaven or on earth, there be gods many and lords many, but to us there is but one God, the Father of whom are all things, and we in him, one Lord, Jesus Christ, by whom are all things, and we by him. Now, false gods aren't true. They're not real. They don't even exist. And so we can know if someone is worshiping a false god, they're not worshiping that something that exists. And if somebody offers a sacrifice to that god, it's not as though that god even really exists. And he's saying here that eating sacrifices to those idols is nothing because they don't even really exist. There is but one God. Now, you could read this of Paul and come away with the idea that Paul is contradicting the church. It said in Acts 15, you're not supposed to eat food sacrificed to idols. And Paul is saying here, it doesn't really matter because those things don't even exist. But rightly understood, Paul is giving the reasons behind the Acts 15 decree. He's helping them to understand this is why. They didn't say why, they just said don't do it. But here he's helping them understand this is why you're not supposed to do that. We'll continue, verse 7. Therefore, there is not in every man that knowledge. Okay, so not everyone knows that there is one true God. There are some people that actually think there are many gods. Continuing, for some with conscience of the idol unto this hour eat it as a thing offered to an idol, and their conscience being weak is defiled. So there's some people that think that this God, this false god is true, and when they eat this food, their conscience is defiled. They think they're actually worshiping a different God because they don't know. And so he says in verse 8, but meat does not commend us to God, for neither if we eat are we the better, neither if we eat it not, we are the worse. And then verse 9 is the crux of his argument. He lays it on the line right here. But take heed, lest by any means this liberty, this knowledge of yours become a stumbling block to those that are weak. You know that there's no such thing as other gods, and if you eat that food, take care. It doesn't cause someone else to stumble. Verse 10, for if any man see that you which have knowledge sit at food and in the idol's temple, will not their conscience, which is weak, be emboldened to eat those things which are offered to idols? And through your knowledge shall your brother perish, for whom Christ died. So they were taking their freedom, their knowledge, and they were using this, but it was causing others to stumble because their conscience was being compromised, and it was causing them to leave the faith. Verse 12, but when you so sin against the brethren. Whoa. Paul takes something that wasn't a moral issue, and now it becomes a moral issue. Like, if you know this will cause a weak brother to stumble, and you do it, it is sin. Sin, he connects this to the moral law. This is huge. Wherefore, he says in verse 13, if food makes my brother to offend, I will eat no meat while the world stands, lest I make my brother to offend. He says, while this world stands, I will do nothing that would cause one of my brother's consciences to be compromised. Paul says knowledge, apart from love, puffs up. When we choose to do things in our life that don't affect us, but that affect others, that might cause their conscience to be compromised, we sin. And Paul says we should never do this as long as the world stands. Are there things in your life? They might not affect you, might not be a big deal, but your kids see you. They see the television that you watch. They listen to the music that you're listening to. How do you think it affects their conscience? When parents take a little step in one direction, kids run. They think it's okay. They take a big step. Sometimes we do things that we think, well, that's their problem. Doesn't really matter to me. They can deal with that. So I'm going to speak as a dad of daughters. Sometimes this world pushes things onto our kids that we don't really want. Now, my daughters have no problem with this. I'll just come right out and say that. They have no problem with this. But I know it's a challenge sometimes finding things that are appropriate to wear. So my wife had some clothes for our kids when they were younger, and I thought, man, these just seem a little inappropriate. Not a lot, but a little inappropriate. I said, Faith, can we do better than that? She's like, listen, I try, but you go to the stores and see. So, okay, fine. I'll take you up on that. So I did. I went to Sears store. I mean, you'll find modest clothing there, right? And I remember there on the wall, they had clothing for an 8-year-old girl, and on this side here, it said eye candy. Now, why would I want my 8-year-old daughter wearing something on her that says eye candy? Totally inappropriate. It's hard to find modest, appropriate clothing. But I just see here in 1 Corinthians 8, Paul teaches this principle that if we could somehow be careful of the conscience of others so that they not sin, we should do that. Can you see that principle? That principle is there. 1 Corinthians 9, Paul seems to shift gears. He seems to take on a different verse. He talked about knowledge in knowledge and people's consciences in chapter 8. In chapter 9, he shifts gears to rights. Seems like a different topic altogether. Now, you should understand something a little bit about Corinth. Corinth was on a little strip of land between two large bodies of land. It's called an isthmus. And sailors would not want to sail around this huge body of land. They wanted to find a shorter route. And so they would come to this little strip of land, and there was a whole industry built up around this, where they would bring ships up, and they would put logs, and then another log, and then another log, and they would pull the ships out of the water, from log to log to log to log to log, all the way across the isthmus to the other side, back in the water on the other side. And it would save them months of sailing around this huge island. But it cost them a little bit of money to do this. So what would happen is the ships would come up, they would wait their turn to be hauled over the isthmus. While they're waiting, they don't really need the sailors on the ship, so the sailors get off the ship and they hang out in the town. Now, can you imagine a bunch of guys in a town with lots of money? There's industries that pop up, little shops open up, and they're trying to get the money from the sailors, and they have these different entrepreneurial opportunities to invest your money in these things. So then they would wait, and their ship would be hauled over to the other side, and during this time, the sailors would be having a good time. But a lot of corruption, wickedness, and evil sprang up there as well, which is why Corinth was a problem church. So there were scammers. They would use multi-level marketing to find some way to get your money and to take it from you. And so they were all over the place. So the sailors had to be really careful about how they used their money. Paul wanted to be careful that he didn't come across as a scammer just trying to get people's money. And so we see here in 1 Corinthians 8, he's explaining why he acted the way he did when he was in Corinth. So let's look at that together. 1 Corinthians 9, verse 1, he says, "Am I not an apostle? Am I not free? Have I not seen Jesus Christ our Lord? Are you not my work in the Lord?" See, it seems like he switches gears. He's talking about idols and eating the food. Now he's talking about he's an apostle. Okay, Paul, we agree. You're an apostle. Fine. All right. And he says, if I be not an apostle unto others, yet doubtless I am to you, for you are the seal of mine apostleship, are you in the Lord. He's the one that brought them into a living faith in Jesus. In verse 4, he says, have we not the right to eat and to drink? Well, of course, Paul, you have the right to eat and drink. So he's building his case again, all right? Paul has the right to eat and drink. And then he goes on, don't we have the right to lead about a sister or a wife as well as the other apostles? Like the brethren of the Lord and Peter, they had wives. Don't we have the right to do the same? Well, of course, Paul, you have that right. And verse 6, or only I and Barnabas, have we not the right to not work? And to be supported by the gospel ministry? Well, of course, Paul, you have that right. And then he starts to build his case further. Are there any soldiers that go fight and they're not supported by the government they're working for? Or who plants a vineyard and doesn't eat the fruit of the vineyard? Or who has a flock of sheep and doesn't enjoy the fruit of the sheep, the milk? Of course, that is a natural right. We can see that. It seems reasonable. And then verse 7. For it is written in the law of Moses, you shall not muzzle the mouth of the ox that treads out the corn. Does God take care for oxen? So here was a biblical principle. If an ox was supposed to go around the treadmill that ground the corn, you weren't supposed to muzzle him. You're supposed to leave his mouth free. So while he's there working, he can also eat. So my wife asks me to slice olives in our house. That's my job. Chris, we're having haystacks. Will you slice the olives? So I get out the knife and the cutting board and the can of olives, and I open it up and slice, 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 slice. But I love olives. If there's one thing I love more than honey buns, it is olives. And so I'll pop an olive in my mouth, and then another one, and she's like, Chris, don't eat any more olives. And so then I will simply pull out 1 Corinthians 9 and verse 8, you shall not muzzle the mouth of the ox that treads out the corn. And so now she simply buys extra cans of olives, knowing that I'll eat some along the way. So it's a right. When the oxen were there, that was a right that they had. And Paul was establishing this point. There are rights that people have. And I, as a minister of the gospel and apostle, I have a right to be supported by that which I'm doing, the gospel work. But in verse 12, let's look what he has to say. If others be partakers of this right over you, are not we rather? Nevertheless, we have not used this right, but suffer all things, lest we should hinder the gospel. Paul had a right that he set aside in Corinth so that they would not be prejudiced against the gospel. He wanted to reach them, and he knew that this would prevent them. So we see these two thoughts. One is about knowledge in 1 Corinthians 8, and the other is about rights in 1 Corinthians 9. Knowledge and rights. Don't let your knowledge cause you to help someone else compromise their conscience. Don't let your rights prevent someone from entering the kingdom. Set it aside. Now, Paul builds this case, and he says it's sin if you're not careful in this regards. So sin, this makes me think of the Ten Commandments. And I'm going to look at the Ten Commandments just briefly, and we'll look at how the idea of setting aside right or power that we have, how it impacts others. Now, I have a question to ask. For those of you that are 12 or younger, if you know the very first commandment, raise your hand. And I don't need to know the whole commandment, just a little summary. The very first commandment, just raise your hand, good and high. I'm looking for a hand. Okay, Sean. What is the first commandment? You have to think about it. Okay. Who else? Now, Briella, did I see your hand? No. Anyone else? Okay, here in the back, yes? Is that Alexis? It's the first commandment. Wonderful. Would you come up here for me? Wonderful. I need you to come stand right over here. Okay, now be thinking. What's the next commandment? Can you stand right here? Excellent. Okay, good. Right. She represents the first commandment. Okay, Matthias? You're right. You shall not make any graven images. Come stand right here. Okay, the third commandment. Landon? You shall not take the Lord's name in vain. Would you come up here? Just stand right here. All right. The fourth commandment. Does anyone know this one? If you've already answered, don't answer. Justin.
Thou shalt remember the Sabbath.
Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. Excellent. Come on up here. I need another a volunteer for the fifth commandment. This is my favorite one. Any Anderson kid, you're welcome to raise your hand here. Yes? Honor your father and your mother. Come on up here, Gabriella. Okay. All right, so the sixth commandment. I'm getting further along here. I see a hand. Yes, Jeremiah? What? Don't murder. Excellent. Would you come up here, Jeremiah? All right. Okay. Stay in order. Don't get confused. Okay. All right. So we're at the 6th commandment, right? It's the 7th commandment. Who knows what it is? Okay. I see a hand. Yes, Micah? You're right. Okay. You won't commit adultery. Come on. Can you come up here? All right. Okay, Jeremiah, you're right down here. Stand right on this end here. And then Micah. All right. So I guess you know what I'm going to ask next. What's the 8th commandment? Yes. What is it? Don't steal. You're right. Can you come up here? All right. And then the 9th commandment. I need a hand. Okay. Elliot. You should not bear false witness. Excellent. Come on right up here. And then the 10th commandment. I'm looking for a hand. Yes? Seth, what? You shall not covet. Okay, good. Come on up here. Excellent. Okay. All right, the 10 commandments represented by these people. Now, I need you to stand right over here. Okay, just right there. I want to spread them out a little bit. Go down beside him. Going down, going down, going down, going down, going down, going down, going down. All right, come on down. And then you stand right here in the middle. And then you stand over here. Okay. Excellent. Okay. Now, if we look at the commandments of God from a you shall not standpoint, it's true. But it's also there is a you shall position to the commandments as well. But each one of these commandments represents a power that we have in our life that we can exercise. God has given us a power, a freedom of choice, right? Okay, you come this way just a little bit, right? Yeah, right there. Kind of in the middle between those two. Okay, excellent. Okay, he's given us the power of choice, and he's told us that we shall have no other gods before him. Right, Alexis? No other gods. Can we exercise power over him in that area? Yeah, we can choose another God. He is the God of love. We can choose to honor someone else, the God of this world, the God of selfishness, right? God deserves, because he deserves to be the sovereign of the universe, to have our exclusive devotion. He deserves that. He deserves the right of first priority because he was first. God is first. But we can exercise a power and deny that and reject that, can't we? So God has called us, as we have seen before, in Paul's life, we have these things in our life that we can have. We can have this knowledge, but do we set it aside for the good of others? Now, we can choose to have another God, but that's foolish. Why would we want that, right? All right, the 2nd commandment.
Thou shalt have no other graven image.
You shall not make any graven images. Now, does God have the right to define who he is? Yeah, he has. When we take and we make a graven image, we're kind of trying to express who we say God is. He's a golden calf. He's something we want to place in our life. He's money. He's cars. He's whatever. But God has the right to define who he is. Do we have power in that area? Could we misalign who he is? Yeah, for sure. And then the 3rd commandment.
Do not say bad words or...
Don't take the name of the Lord your God in vain. Right, and so when I was a kid, my mom taught me, Chris, there's some words you shouldn't use. And, but particularly in relation to God. Now, I grew up understanding, not everyone understands this, but to use his name in a special way. So don't just use it carelessly, as though I stubbed my toe and I said, as you hear often, oh my God, that's taking his name in vain. But there's other forms of the word God that are used. Gosh, geez, Jesus. Those are often used as expressions of frustration. They're not referring to our God in heaven. That's taking his name in vain. But there's other ways to take his name in vain as well. When I was traveling through Tanzania, and the vehicle stopped for us to use the restroom, and I got out, and there was this little tiny hut, and they had food in there for sale. So I went in there, and I saw they had bubble gum. And it had the picture of our previous president, Obama, on there. Obama gum. And it was the coolest thing. It was like a whole box of Obama gum. So I brought the Obama gum home to my kids. I'm like, look, this is so cool. The Tanzanians and Kenyans are so excited that we had a president that they could identify with. We represent God. And when people see the actions of our life, they say, those Christians. Or could be, those Christians are really nice folks. We represent God, and when we misrepresent him, we take his name in vain, right? Fourth commandment. Keep the Sabbath day holy. Holy. Does God have the right to determine a day of worship? Does he have a right to determine the exact day of worship? Does he have the right to determine that this is the time that he's going to have an appointment with us? Yeah. And does he have the right to determine how we have that day? It's a little quiet in there. Okay, so I was out on a date with my whole family. We like to do that. We have a date, which is all of us, and we go out to a Mexican restaurant, it's our favorite. And so we're there, and sometimes the conversation gets around things I'm not real interested in. I'm the only guy, and talking about high heels and purses, and I'm just not interested in those things. I have to remind them occasionally, there is a guy at the table, please guide your conversation differently. So I have the tendency periodically, everyone, just to pull, a little diversion out. I might have gotten an email from one of you, and I just need to, oh, yeah, okay, and check up with that. And so immediately, without hesitation, every head at the table whips my direction. Mr. Anderson, what are you doing? They have an expectation that when I'm with them, my time is theirs, even if their conversation is something I'm not interested in. Do you think if God sets an appointment with us, he has the right to say, this is our time. Leave everything else alone. That's what he does. It's a holy day. It's made for us, but not so that we can ignore him. And so it's a holy day. But the commandment goes on, and it says that there's some that we are to protect their right of rest on the Sabbath. Who does it say? Your son, your daughter, the foreigner, your servant, even the ox or the cattle. These are supposed to be protected. Now we see a transition happening here. These over here had to do with God and his right in our life and our ability to reject him on those different levels. But the Sabbath is different. It transitions, the first part is about God, and it transitions to mankind, how we relate to them, your son and your daughter and your servants. Now, servants, do they deserve a rest? Sometimes in our production-driven society, we see people as goods, as machines, but God sees them as human beings to have a relationship with, and he wants to pull that back so that we don't take advantage of people. Do they have a right to rest even if they don't know it? Do I have the right to take that rest from them? But I could, couldn't I? What are the servants that we have in our life? What are the servants? We go to the grocery store. They serve us, don't they? My family and I, we don't go to the grocery store on Sabbath. We want them to have their rest. What about a restaurant? They serve you food, right? We have chosen not to partake. We want them to have their rest, whether they know it or not. Maybe God will reveal that to them, but we are not going to take advantage of them. It's interesting, each one of these categories, sons and daughters, children, servants, foreigners, cattle. Now, foreigners, they don't have the same rights as a citizen. They can be taken advantage of. So each one of these categories, little children, servants, foreigners, and even ox. Ox can't exert their own rights. If you have them in a pen, that's where they stay. If you have a whip, that's where they go. Ox are yours to control. God has said, these you're not to take advantage of. They have rights. It's interesting, Isaiah 58, God brings this point out, and he begins with the fact that there are those in your life, the oppressed, that have rights. Set the captives free. And then he goes on to say, keep the Sabbath. The fourth commandment says the same thing, but the other way. It says, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy, and don't oppress those in your life. The Sabbath is about freedom, but it's also about how we don't trample on the rights of others. Okay, the Sabbath. Now we move over here to the sixth commandment. This is my favorite one. Please tell us what it is. Honor your father and your mother. Is that a right that parents have? It seems that other cultures really understand that. They take care of their parents. When I was a kid, my mom would take us to nursing homes, and we would go from room to room singing. They liked Amazing Grace and the Old Rugged Cross, and they loved hearing that. And we'd ask them, do you have family that live in the area? Yes. Oh, when's the last time you got to see them? I don't remember. I think it was Christmas. People will take their honored parents, dump them in a nursing home so they don't have to be inconvenienced, and leave them there. Is that honoring their parents? No, that's not. They have a right to be honored. They also have a right to have a clean reputation. You should protect your parents' reputation, protect their honor. And they also have a right to be involved in your life in some way, appropriately. I mean, there's some parents that are a little much, right? Like clean your room, So if your parents ask you to do something that's not out of line with God's law, if it's in harmony with His will, wouldn't it be honoring to do that? Please park your car on this side of the driveway. No, I want to park it on the other. We can honor them with this. But we have a right that we could exert to dishonor them. So this commandment helps us to see that we need to protect and honor our parents. Okay, Jeremiah, what's the next commandment?
Don't covet.
Oh, no. You had it before. Don't murder. Don't murder. This commandment exhibits two rights. That you should not murder. Everyone has a right to life. And the other element is that we have a right to justice. Murdering is taking someone's life illegally. Not that I could ever do it legally, but there are governments that deal with that sort of thing. And so everyone has a right to life. There was a bus that was traveling in Kenya from, I think, Nairobi to Madeira. Madeira had just been the scene of a terrible slaughter of Christians that were there. And this bus was stopped by the Al-Shabaab, and they had their turbans on and their big guns. And they told everyone to get off the bus. And they told the Muslims to go to this side and the Christians to go to that side. And so everyone went to the same side. So, no, I think you misunderstood. All the Muslims on this side and all the Christians on this side. And the Muslim ladies were busy pulling out their little shawls and putting them over the Christian ladies' heads. They refused to separate. The Muslims could have easily said, oh, see you Christians, I got to go over here. But they knew what happened before, and they said, there's no way. We are one. They respected this principle of the right to life. Were those Muslims keeping this commandment? Yeah. Were they honoring God? Yeah. Certainly they were. Now, the religion is maybe not in alignment with the principles of the Bible, but they understood this because it's natural. God has placed this law in our heart. This is an area where we can take advantage of others, and we need to not do that. Okay. Do not commit adultery. Now, what are the rights within this commandment? Every person has the right to exclusivity, to a relationship, to a faithful relationship with a partner for life, a covenantal, permanent relationship. They have that right. Is this taken advantage of by many people? It is, sadly. This is probably an area that we have the most control over someone else. We could take advantage of their right. Now, I want to jump back to the sixth commandment here real quick in the area of justice. If someone's life is taken, there's no way to give it back. It's permanent. And so they deserve justice in their life, right? Would you agree with that? This idea of justice isn't an idea of justice for me. It's an idea of me protecting their right to justice. Do you have people in your life that you are in control over in some way? Are you protecting their rights to justice as the boss, as the employer? I think this commandment brings that point out. Okay, tell us where are we at? 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th. What is the 8th commandment? Don't steal. Okay, what right? No stealing. So what right does this protect? Property rights. It identifies the fact that we have a right to own property. Now, there's whole governmental systems today that argue against this point, but the Bible itself teaches that we have a right to own property. I'll save the story to the end. The last commandment typically affects this one dramatically, coveting. Okay, the 9th commandment. Bear false witness. Right, you shall not bear false witness. You shall not lie is another word for this. Now, is it a right that we always get to know the truth? Is that a right? Well, there might be a time when there's some information that's confidential. It's not your right to know that. There's information that's not for you. I'll just leave it there. There's information that's not for you. Is it your right to not be deceived? Yes. So the motive in why we might withhold information from someone is it might be confidential, or we might be trying to deceive. What is the way we exercise this power over others? Something we need to think about. Okay, the last one. You shall not covet. Now, this commandment isn't one that's seen immediately on the outside, but it affects the inside. And we begin to act wrong or inappropriate in our relationships because of it. We see something we want, we begin to negotiate to get that. We see that with David and Uriah. I was in my parents' bedroom. I don't know if any of you kids ever go in your parents' bedroom. And I was looking through the drawers because I had nothing else to do. And I came across some badges in my dad's drawer. They were so cool. One was a photographic badge, and another was a police badge. They were kind of fake, but they were metal. They looked really cool. So I would go in there every day and look at those badges, and the more I looked at them, the more I liked them, the more I liked them, the more I wanted them. But I really liked the police badge. I was coveting in my heart something that I did not have the right to want. It wasn't mine. And that led me to break this commandment right here. I went and I stole it from my dad's drawer thinking he'd never know. And I would go out and I would play with it underneath the power lines behind my house. It was so fun. Until one day my dad called us in. Chris, Scott, I'm missing a badge out of my drawer. Do you know anything about this? And he eventually got the truth out of me that I had taken that. So he took it from me and he gave it to my brother. I was so upset. Like he didn't even care about it. I loved the badge. Okay, good job, kids. Thank you. You can go sit back down. The commandments aren't just a list. You do these things and you are guaranteed entrance into the kingdom of heaven. They are principles that guide our life about how we can take advantage of others and how we need to protect their rights. We see that in Paul's life. He was seeking to protect their rights. Philippians chapter 2 tells us about our Savior. Philippians 2, and it tells us that he himself, let's look at that. Philippians 2, Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians. Jesus was equal. There we are, Philippians 2. Philippians 2 and verse 5. Let this mind be in you, which was also in Christ Jesus, who being in the form of God, thought it not robbery to be equal with God. So Jesus was God. He had all the rights of godhood. And yet the Bible tells us in verse 7, he made himself of no reputation. He emptied himself. He set aside his rights and took upon him the form of a servant and was made in the likeness of man. And being found in the fashion of a man, he endured the cross for you and me. Revelation 14 and verse 4 describes a group of people that follow the Lamb. Where did Jesus go? He humbled himself. He emptied himself of these rights of taking advantage. He emptied himself so that others could be blessed. I was laying on this bed, kind of, covered by a curtain, wondering, am I going to die here? My wife left. A nurse came and got me. They put me on another thing and took me somewhere else in another room. They couldn't figure out what was wrong with me. They did all these tests. We don't know what's wrong with you. Maybe it's meningitis. We're not sure. But we have some medicine we're going to give you. Oh, good. And we have to give it to you by IV. Oh, okay, no problem. I'm fine with that. Just put it right there. It's okay. But it's going to burn a little bit. Oh, I don't like pain. Okay. So the nurse came in, and just as fast as they could put the medicine in, because they wanted to save my life, wham! And I felt that, I'm just exaggerating a little bit, but it felt that way. And I felt it going up my vein, just burning and stinging and burning and stinging all the way up. Oh, it hurt so bad. And they said, okay, well, we're going to let you rest now. I'm going to rest. A few hours later, they came in. Sorry, but we need to give you some more medicine. Oh, they give me an IV and just burning up my arm. Oh, it was so painful. And I remember getting woken up in the middle of the night. It's distinct in my mind as yesterday. And there was this male nurse that was there. And he said, my friend, it's time. I have to give you your medicine. Oh, please, I want to sleep. Oh, no, sir, we need to give you your medicine. Okay. And he just very slowly, very gently, he just eased the plunger down. And it just hurt a little bit. I just felt it going a little bit, not so bad, until it was all done. It didn't hurt nearly as bad. I remember thinking, I love this man. He's so nice. He was a male nurse. Maybe he was nicer, I don't know, but he had the right, the power in his hands to just discharge his job quickly, boom, and off to the next patient. I'm sure he was busy, lots of people to take care of, but no. He paused, eased the medicine in because he knew it hurt, eased it in, and made my life so much better. I'm grateful to him for that. Just imagine a group of people called Christians living at the end of time. They say, I know we have rights, but what can we do to make the lives of others better? I will not offend their conscience while the world stands. I would rather die than do that. What a testimony this might be. As people wake up and they see Jesus being lived out in the lives of his people. Are you willing to examine your life? What are the ways that you could make the lives of others better? What could you change? How can you protect their rights? God is calling for you to do this in the example of Paul.